Welcome to CTG Weekly with Mark and Andre, a weekly podcast where we talk about whatever we want to in games. This week, we're doing a holiday season recommendation podcast, and then we talk a little bit about our experiences with the first 2.5 weeks of the most recent World of Warcraft expansion, Dragonflight. Hello, Andre.
Hello.
Xmas baby.
It's true. Tis my season.
Tis your season. Happy holidays and happy break time for everyone who gets them, who gets a break and who celebrates a holiday around this time. If you are one of those folks, what are we going to do today? Well, we're just going to talk about some gift ideas, some gaming-related gifting on CTG Weekly.
Super excited to talk about this because we tend to do this for each other and for our colleagues. We have like a bunch of recommendations that we generally have on hand, but I think it's really neat to get a chance to trot those out to the public.
Yeah, and to actually think about what I might want as a gift, because I don't think about that too often.
You should. You're worth it.
I don't really like getting presents. It's weird. Okay, so what do you want for your birthmas?
Oh God, no, because this is like really bad because my partner might be listening to this. So maybe what I want to say first for people who are listening to this is we're not really going to be talking about hardware today. So like game consoles, console special editions, or if you're on PC, things like keyboards, mice, headsets, webcams, monitor stands. All those things are super valid presents. The reason why I don't feel comfortable talking too much about them is everybody's home setup is different, and a lot of gaming peripherals are very personal. For mice, for example, like what kind of grip style do you have? What kind of weight do you like to your mouse? Like all this stuff is really difficult to recommend to somebody. It's like recommending clothes or buying clothes for someone else. It's very personal and it's very unique. But if you know the person you're buying for and you know that they need one of those peripherals, totally valid choice. At least that's my feel about this with hardware.
Yeah.
So please don't buy me hardware if you're somebody who is buying me a gift.
Yeah, no, it's true. I'm going to test drive that stuff.
What would I want? Well, listen, you can never go wrong with Arkham products for me. That's my general take. And so that'll probably be my first recommendation for somebody. And I guess throughout this episode, we're going to be moving through tabletop, board games and digital games and, some extras for those. But I think Arkham is like my number one pick to recommend to anybody who's into card games.
Well, I would actually say this as far as these kind of games go. Like, there are a lot of games in the Arkham. What is the full name of this game for listeners? Let's get it correct.
It's the Arkham Horror card game,
right? By Fantasy Flight.
And if you're looking at this on places like BGG, the Board Game Geek website, it'll be listed with the 2016 date because there are different Fantasy Flight Arkham games. Like there is the Eldritch Horror game. So it's the Arkham Horror TCG 2016. And if you want a list of product order, one of the places you can go, which is a tool I use frequently, is the Arkham DB website, which has like a full listing of all the cards and what the order of sets is and all this stuff. But I guess we can talk a bit more about it because you wanted to say something about it.
There are a few of these different style of games that are in this Fantasy Flight game, card game mold where they release these packs throughout the year. You can can give this gift of like a core box. This is true for Marvel Champions, which is the game I prefer out of this line. Surprisingly, actually, I started with Arkham and I moved to Marvel Champions. And despite some early apprehensions about it, I actually do like the game more and have played it much more than Arkham now at this point. The Lord of the Rings collectible card game as well.
Yeah, it's my number 2.
Also there. And like, if you have someone who likes any of these IPs, I think a core box of one of these games is a really good investment.
Yeah.
Just into fun. It's a good investment into fun because like you can go buy a new hero pack for Marvel Champions, a new scenario expansion for Arkham Horror later in the line, and you're always building on that gift.
Yeah.
And I mean, the games are just well made. Like they're a blast to play. They're all cooperative. Lord of the Rings is also cooperative, yes.
They're not all cooperative. So this is what I want to, I want to make a small asterisk for folks. So Marvel Champions, Lord of the Rings, and Arkham are the 3 co-op ones. And I think these I would recommend all without any reservation.
Yeah.
My sense is that the easiest one to get into is Marvel Champions, then Arkham, and Lord of the Rings is the hardest one to get into because it leans much more heavily on the deck building card complexity side of things.
Although
and it's
they
a bit
all
more
have deck
obtuse.
building if that's what you're into. Like
It's true.
they satisfy that part.
The reason why I would recommend Arkham personally is I find the campaigns are more ornate. So there's more narrative content. There's more like stories to read and to act out when you're playing the game. So that's neat. But really, if any of these properties are people's jams, that's like a really good thing to do. But they have other games which, if you're looking on their product on the Fantasy Flight product page, you might opt for them because of the franchise they cover. So for example, the Game of Thrones card game is actually a versus card game.
Right.
As is Legend of the Five Rings. So those are more, one player versus one player card games. They're still fantastic if that's what you're looking for, but they're not co-op games. And so, do you prefer co-op or versus? That's up to you. The other thing with Marvel Champions, Arkham, and Lord of the Rings is that they can be played solo. So if the person you're gifting to is somebody who is fine playing card games by themselves, they're kind of also built like single player games with a lot of road to cover. So generally just like really strong products overall. And if you know somebody who has these, has one of these, and you don't know what to get them, well, looking on the database websites is a bit of a help to figure out, what products have what cards, and maybe you can figure out like which product is missing. Lord of the Rings is a bit of a special case in that because it had a very long first run print, and now it's doing a second print, and so there are products that are just discontinued,
right,
and they're being repackaged and reformatted now. So my only asterisk would be if you're buying Lord of the Rings today, buy either the revised core set, the Fellowship of the Ring campaign box, or the Angmar campaign box and Hero expansion, because they're separate. So you can look up this stuff, but like don't go into, because they have something like I think 89 different products for the original series, and they're just kind of like they're doing this thing where they're taking like what used to be 6 products and merging it into one bigger product, so it's easier to keep track of, which I think is fantastic for mind brain power.
Marvel Champions is a bit easier to shop for in terms of
Yeah.
like you need the core box, buy it. It's fun on its own. Then there are I think 4, maybe 5. There's between 4 and 5 big box expansions that come with 2 new superheroes and like a 5 encounter campaign in those boxes. And the campaigns are not as ornate as Arkham, but they flow pretty easily. If you commit an afternoon, you can probably get through a box if you really want to. The one thing I would be wary of is that difficulty-wise, quality-wise, not all of the boxes are made equal, so do a bit of research there. I'd probably stay away from the Guardians of the Galaxy box if you're going for that like I want the core box and one additional experience. You can also just buy individual hero packs. They sell some side scenarios. They're okay. That's not what I would really recommend as a first buy. I would really go for one of the supplemental expansions, probably the Thanos box or the Red Skull box first, if that's the route that you go, or pick up a couple of the heroes that you want, because there are tons now that you can buy, and they really do change up the deck building, the way the game plays. And I think the way Marvel Champions is built is is really sensible, because the thing you're putting your money into, instead of Arkham where it's like a necessary progression from one scenario to the next that doesn't really flow well unless you're doing it all as the big grand narrative, and some of those go out of stock. For Marvel Champions, you're just looking for an individual hero. It stands alone, and once you get it, you can play it against any encounter that they release in the game.
So
It's so much easier to shop for this game.
yeah, I will say, and this is my semi rebuttal to that, is Arkham has also started modernizing its product packaging rollout, and so the original set, Dunwich and Carcosa, are now operating on the revised FFG model that Champions and LOTR is also running on, and so like you don't have to buy individual scenarios anymore. It's one box, and you get the whole thing in one like $45 to $50 product. And you effectively just pick the campaign that you want to play. So I would recommend Core Set, and then I would probably recommend Dunwich for ease of play. The one campaign I would caution people against buying unless they are really into extremely high difficulty is Forgotten Age in Arkham. That's like my one asterisk, like be careful with that, because I played all of them and that one is particularly challenging.
Yeah, if you're just starting out too, yeah. I mean, I really the game's going to be hard if you're just starting.
Now, if you are a person, or the person that you're buying for, has a lot of this product, there are side products to buy that I think increase the enjoyment of the experience. You and I are big fans of premium components, and for Arkham, what I would recommend is going on Etsy. There are storage options that you can buy that make holding the cards much, much easier. There are manufacturers that make dividers for every campaign and every card set. And they've I think taken down my like game prep time from when you left me your old stock, Mark, from like, I want to say 30 minutes per scenario to about 5 minutes per scenario.
Yeah.
Because everything is so much more organized now. There are tokens for clues and damage. There are standees for your characters. There are sort of plywood boards that are extremely detailed for character cards. So there's like an entire world out there if you want to get something off of Etsy to increase the experience that you have at the table with a person that you play with. Totally available to do so. And also sleeves for cards. Those are always good. Just make sure the measurements are right for the Fantasy Flight products, and I think they have those up on the website now.
Yeah, I think this is actually a good time just to jump to Etsy in general for any of the board gamers. Premium components rock. Like custom dice trays for rolling if you have board game friends or significant others that you are buying stuff for. Premium components, like I've been looking, so there's a game called Terraforming Mars where you terraform Mars and like you put little cardboard hexes onto Mars, but there are a bunch of Etsy accounts that make these wonderful 3D printed components that are very premium, but man, oh man, do they make playing the game cool. And like if the person you're buying for has a favorite board game in their collection, you don't need to go whole hog on like the most expensive stuff, but any like component upgrades for board game that is well liked, I think is always a really exciting gift for anyone who plays board games on the regular.
Yeah, it's one of the things that over time I found has become very intrinsic to how I like playing the games that I play a lot. Mm-hmm. So Arkham for me is like that, but I am considering, for example, going in on the expanded components for Dune Imperium, which those are actually made by the company and you buy them separately. We'll talk about that game in a little bit, I'm sure. But Etsy is one avenue, but there are also companies or stores that sell like generic components for games that you can use. So stuff like logs of wood or food or iron bars, depending on what game you're playing. And they've just always made our games better. Like whether we played Scythe or Brass Birmingham, like all of those games just look better
They do.
with the good
They look better.
components.
They feel better. The memories that you're making of those games, it's such a annoying capitalist thing to say to some degree, although not always, because a lot of these extra components are made by like artisanal people who are
Yeah,
doing this as like they're trying to make money, but also they're just passionate about making components because they're also hobbyists as well, right? Like
yeah.
there are crafts people and hobbyists who love games, and
One
it
of
really does
the
just enhance everything. So I don't know. Take a look at your gifties board game shelf or what you've played with them
yeah
recently, and
one of
I
the
couldn't see that going wrong. I mean anything could
absolutely
go
not.
wrong, but
Well, so here, if people are listening to this and are going to say, well, I'd really love to get custom components for the person I'm buying for, but I just really don't know what components to buy for their games. Mats are a really good place to start. A lot of games that I think need mats don't come with them, especially card games, but a lot of board games benefit from them. And mats make going to stores to play games, rolling them out at home. It just smooths over the experience and often makes like manipulating the components a lot easier and also increases the atmosphere. So Fantasy Flight mats for sure. But for example, you're somebody who plays Magic the Gathering Commander. Mats are really good for Magic too, because you're manipulating a lot of cards on surfaces that might be uneven or scratchy, you
yeah.
know?
So the Fantasy Flight mats, I would actually like these. I have some concerns with because they're big, but
Mm-hmm.
Arkham and Marvel Champions, if you're playing with more than two players, those mats don't fit the cards really.
Arkham's different because now I think the game is so rich in components that you manipulate that I think the mat is really for the scenario pieces. And if I had a bigger table, I would just get mats for players, like the player mats, which are a different component. The
That
game
makes
mat itself,
sense.
I think, is for the scenario, the monsters, the miniature player cards, and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
But if you had all
Um,
those mats, I don't think there's a sizable enough table
you need a
either.
you need a big ass table for
And if
sure
you have
for
a
that
table that
game.
big, it's probably a table for board games anyway with the felt and stuff. So then you don't need the
That's
mats.
fair.
It's a weird configuration, and I like the ideas of the mats, and I always bought one when I was buying the Fantasy Flight
Yeah,
games. The only one I liked was the L5R mat, which is gorgeous. But
it's fantastic mat for a terrible game.
unfortunately, the game wasn't terrible. It had some.
Yeah,
Let's be generous. I did really like what was there with three severe balance problems. But anyway,
it's
that's for another day.
yeah, it's the least favorite. It's I think it's collectively our least favorite of the Fantasy Flight games, which still puts it really high up on our list of card games, anyways.
Yeah.
Um, but we can talk. Okay, so that's Etsy, very good, um, very neat, and one of the rare cases where I think if you are in a relationship or you want to buy keycaps for somebody that their taste in keycaps and what they like to customize, keyboard keycaps are one of the few quote hardware recommendations that I might make because they're very cute and decorative. If folks are into that,
Yeah. They're
so
cool.
yeah, so Fantasy Flight kind of gets a general pass from us as most of what they do is great. Hard to go wrong. But do we want to talk a bit more about video games and other board games?
Yeah. Let's do this.
What do you have a place you want to start, or do you want me to?
Well, we're on the board game train, so maybe let's do some board game recommendations
Let's
to
go.
start, and then we'll get into some video games. Um, I mean, what are you recommending? Do you have a good solid
My
recommendation?
so this is my broadest recommendation that I can give for anyone, and this is so I'm thinking I'm gonna sort of tier my recommendations for board games into three tiers, ranging from accessible to more specialized. And that tends to also map onto price. So a lot of the games that are more accessible tend to be less expensive, I think. And the more specialized and sort of prestigious, quote unquote, the games get, the more expensive they also get. So that should help people. I think it is really, really hard to not, make somebody happy with Azul. I think Azul, like the original Azul, is a game that is. I've played it with you. I've played it with people who play a bit of board games, and I played it with my folks who play no board games, and it's been a hit with everyone. It's in the mid-range of prices, so around the $40 mark. If you can find it on sale, even better. There are multiple versions of the Azul, so this is the one that doesn't have a subtitle. It's not called like Stained Glass of Sintra or anything. It's just Azul.
I haven't liked any of the sequels.
Yeah, I'm not like those. I have mixed feelings about, but the original is kind of like near my number one all-time board game recommendation for anyone. It's easy to set up. It's short to play, but you can play multiple back-to-back sessions if you want to do that. It's easy to teach, and it just all around hell yeah from me.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. Do I have a good general recommendation here?
Well, you own a lot of party games that I think are really good if you want to speak about some of those.
Yeah, party games. Okay, so
those are good.
There's two, and people with way more viewers and listeners than us have definitely recommended the party games that I would recommend already. Although one maybe that hasn't been, and I think this is a local game. Like I've never seen it played anywhere else, but the game Anomia is so fun, and it's such a simple thing. It's just a deck of cards. You get in a circle, and basically as the cards come out, as you draw them one by one, you're going to end up matching with other people around the table, and you have to basically say the correct thing that comes to your mind before the other person. But it produces this really fun dynamic, and it's lightning fast. It's really easy. You could teach it to anybody, really. And I think it's a bit underrated for what it does.
It's probably my number 2 party game to play when we're at big tables with colleagues.
It's a game you could get at Christmas with your family, with anybody, and throw it on the table, and it would be really, really easy to play.
Yeah. The other one that you introduced me to and that I would recommend to anybody is Codenames. That game is,
everyone knows Codenames now.
Yeah, I would assume so, but in case people haven't heard about it, it's sort of like a charades with cards that give prompts, and people have to sort of try to make you guess the words that are the ones that give them points without making you guess the words that give points to the enemy team or that make you lose outright. Again, super easy to set up, not very expensive to buy, scalable to, I think, virtually any player account. Yeah. And in and out in an hour.
Codenames is about 6 years old-ish, maybe more at this point, but we played it again 2 weeks ago. Still fun as hell. It really is still an enjoyable game. Just the base Codenames is like, this is somehow, after all this time, still fun. The one that I would recommend is called Monikers. It's harder to get. I think it's much more difficult to find. And it's way more niche than Anomia, I think, in that there are a lot of references that the game makes, but it also gives you prompts to know what the references are. So you don't actually have to know anything going into it, because the game will teach you the references that it's trying to make. And you basically go, it is a guessing game where you're trying to give clues to your other team to guess the prompt that you have. But it's played over a series of rounds, and you're using the same clues as the rounds change, which means the first round you can say anything. The second round is one word. The third round you have to do gestures, and then you can continue this on in as many ways as you like. We did a game of Monikers where we did like 6 or 7 rounds where it devolved into like hand puppets, like shadow puppets you had to use to give the same clues. And it's really interesting. The most fascinating thing about Monikers is the way you'll see people's brains absorb this new referential information, and how you're changing the way you're communicating a simple idea to someone. to get the same idea across, as this goes from you can basically read an essay about it to, I don't know, you have to use a shadow puppet, you know?
Yeah.
And people will be able to understand. Like it's an interesting exercise in communication. But it's also fun. It's also just a fun game that is an all-time favorite for me.
Yeah. I feel like that's a good, core for
Yeah, for sure.
for like all around games that you can buy for pretty much any crowd, and also break them out Christmas Day or whatever holiday you celebrate, really, and just have a good time.
Yeah.
If you think that playing games with your family is a good time and not terrifying, depending on what your
Now, on the
situation
flip
is.
side of things, if you want to ignore your family or you want the option to, I have some heavier recommendations.
Go ahead.
A game that I love that I've only played once. I think it was recently out of stock, as most games have been lately, where they come in waves where you'll be able to get them, they're all gone, and then 2 years later the game will appear again, and you got to get it while the getting's good. Is Ryan Laukatz's game Sleeping Gods. It is awesome. What do? You are effectively the crew of a ship that gets kind of stranded in place and time, and you sail around going on an adventure that is very RPG like. It has some puzzly, meaty combat that, if you're like, you can play this by yourself. You can have, I think, up to 4 total players in this game, but you could actually like sink your teeth into this and play through a game of like 60, 70 hours of this pretty easily. And every time you beat it, it unlocks new things so that you can explore the narrative and the world more, because there's no way you're going to get through it all at once. And if you like that kind of wide open exploration, it's not dice rolling, but it is like some chance based successes, and just getting cool items, getting new abilities, having this crew. Man, this game is cool. It is really good, and it is available now in time for the holiday season. So I would really recommend, if that's an experience you would like, close to a tabletop RPG, but more in board game form, and
Yeah.
completely soloable. Really fun with 3 people, really fun in a duo, really fun by yourself. It is a spectacular product. It is really like, it's a special game. Think about it. Look into it. Sleeping Gods. It's awesome.
I'm not the biggest solo board game person, so if you have another recommendation on that, I'm happy to cede the floor, or we can move to some like
Another good solo board game. I did also play, and this is a deluxe, and this is so Sleeping Gods I think could appeal to anyone. There's another game that I got this past year called Too Many Bones that I think is very gamery. Like it is a lot of dice, it is a lot of number crunching, it is a lot of referencing um like what your abilities are, and like iconography to text across multiple your player sheet, your second player sheet, the enemy references. But if you really like that level of like, sink your teeth into it, gamer style game,
yeah.
I don't think Too Many Bones makes any like it
But it
it
is,
tells you what it is, right? Like out the gate.
and it's really, at least I found it to be very unique in that the way the dice. So it's like if you were playing a game where, like, 70% of the game is the dice, but it's not just rolling generic dice. It's you get, unique dice that you build out. It's the only thing I've ever found that reminds me of the short part of the Yu-Gi-Oh anime where they play with dice instead of cards.
Okay.
And it's just a very unique approach to the way that the dice games often work.
Yeah,
and I really like that. It's
also
all D6s.
Yeah, it's all D6s. It's also an excessively premium product, so it's like some board games, are great, but they don't like will you have this with you for the rest of your life? Too Many Bones is just made so nicely that one it will probably withstand a bomb blast, like with the way the components are made. Like it's a bunch of neoprene and really meaty like chips, like enemies in your health, and the characters on this grid where you do your combat is all represented by these really well made poker chips with good art. They're nice to handle. Like it really is a very tactile and premium game that I could see like in 10 years I'll be like, I could go for a run of Sleeping Gods and it will feel really, or not Sleeping Gods. But I could do that too. Too Many Bones and like busting it out again just to be like,
Yeah.
wow, what a product this is.
So I'm gonna propose we split the rest of the board game segment into 3 chunks.
Yeah.
And I would qualify those as sort of medium to really high priced premium. So like talking about sort of that middle segment of games that are sort of in the, I want to say 50 to 100 range. Then talking about games that I wouldn't qualify by their price, but I would qualify as you really only need one of these because it kind of eats the space at the table. So your big 6-player, 4 to 6 player games that are like this is a whole day game.
Yeah.
Which I know you and I have a couple of those on hand.
I have too many of them.
And yeah, and then campaign games for people. We've talked a bit about it, but there's a ginormous box-shaped hole in the room that we're gonna have to address, I think, when we get to that. So medium price products. One of the games that I think has become a favorite of mine and my partners, and I know also a favorite of yours, is Dune Imperium.
Yeah.
This is a game that I think costs somewhere around the $65 to $70 margin in Canada, so probably a bit cheaper in the US. And it's just an exceptional core game with variations on rules for 1, 2, 3, 4 players. I think it plays extremely well at 3 and also at 4. 2 is a bit more iffy, but it still works really well, and I played with my partner a bunch of times. And there's just a lot of game. It's a worker placement game with tiles on Arrakis, and you get to play a main character from one of the Landsrat houses, and there are a bunch of them. Look it up. I think it's one of the best, just straight up, bang for your buck value games that's come out in the last 2 years. It has an expansion already out and another one on the way, and it has some premium components. But even without any of those, like this is a game where like you unseal this game, you take about, I want to say, an hour to learn how it plays, and you're good to roll. It has like fully replaced anything remotely resembling Risk for me. And it helps that if I'm in my apartment, I can just put on the Dune soundtrack and just really get the atmosphere going.
Yeah, and the good news is with Dune Part 2 being worked on and releasing soon, it will always give you that like bonus advertising in your mind to like, oh, I should bust out this game, which is a thing. Sometimes if you have too many games, you forget about them, but you'll always be reminded of this. And I think it's worth playing. And as far as worker placements go recently, I think there's only one I like better. So it's awesome. Get it.
It's been fantastic throughout, and it has a lot of just like a lot of depth. And I also think it has some scalable difficulty, which is in the characters that you play. Some characters are a bit more straightforward, and some are really complicated, and you can like tailor your experience in any way you like. So that part I think is definitely like, I don't want to rank these, but that's like number one in that range of game for me.
Right.
What about you?
As much as I'm loath to do it because like it's been said to death, Wingspan's great.
Yeah.
Wingspan, you can bring Wingspan out with anybody because birds. What is this game? It's a card-based engine builder where you make birds. You collect birds. You do make them. You make eggs. And you basically collect a bunch of birds into your habitat. They give you different effects. I don't think the game is super complex, but the thing that Wingspan does that is really special is it makes a more complex game accessible to players who would not normally play it, because the birds and the art, the way the game is designed, I think sells really well to just an average person who doesn't consider themselves a player of games.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of success with this in just, very casual environments. If you want to bring a game that isn't just a simple party game to that kind of place, it's a kind of game that players will give a chance to. And the new expansion, Wingspan Asia, just came out.
I will also add like a thing. I agreed on all points, and I tend to always lose at that game, which makes me feel certain ways about it.
I do too, because Scott's
But
amazing.
I will say this: if you are somebody who grew up, collecting almanacs and dinosaur stuff and animal stuff in the '90s, like the Nat Geo style of encyclopedias, this game is like catnip for that, because it is the only game I've ever seen that really has sort of the like it's like you're collecting pages out of a bird encyclopedia, but also it's really fun, and they have like special abilities, and so it merges like that pop culture part of my childhood, which I'm like a big fan of.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And yeah, I think my second recommendation in that mid chunk, price wise, is for people who are a bit more knowledgeable with games and are willing to be a bit more experimental in the kind of format of play that they like. Because this game, although I'm recommending it now like really strongly, I think it does have some complexities with the way that it plays out, and you kind of need some players who I think are a bit more knowledgeable and open. It's Root, which we've played a bunch, and we played with expansions. I think the base game of Root still holds up. It's, depending on what character you play, either an adventure game on a board game, or fully a worker placement, or something that, happens a bit more in the cards. So there's a lot of variation to it. And I really do think it plays best with 4 players. I think it's one of the few games that I would recommend to buy for a hard player count. I think at 2 really struggles to produce like the game that I want to be playing, but it has an exceptionally cute aesthetic, and just like, if you love woodland animals that are very tiny and adorable but also stabby, this game is probably for you if you're in that like very specific skill level of enjoyment for games.
Yeah, people love this game.
Yeah, I feel a bit like reticent to recommend it to somebody who is like looking for an easy to understand game, because I think
It's
is
not.
deceptively difficult.
Yeah.
When like every character is not the most complex to learn aside from the birds, but once you put everything into context and you have to also understand how other people's characters work, it's like learning 4 games in one.
No, it's a really big commitment, and I think you would want to make sure that you have a group of people who are ready to put in the time to it, because one of the things that these asymmetrical games do is that like players around the table learn by watching the players that come before them, and like over the course of a game, you will see a bunch of other players' turns in a 4-player game and get a sense of what is happening and what you should do. In an asymmetrical game, you have to know on your own what you can and should be doing. It's hard to figure out, and I think that can be very alienating for players at the table, right? And so like be aware that this is not for everybody. And I think not to its detriment, Root is a hugely successful game, but I think it, because of its art style, I think it has sort of this illusion that this will be fun for all of us because look at these cute animals. It's not gonna play out that way in practice.
Yeah. So do you have another one in this sort of range, or do we want to move up a bit in terms of price range and kind of commitment?
Yeah, let's move up.
Want to move up? Okay.
I want to move up.
So now we enter the range of the $100 plus games, which in common with each other, they tend to be more massive. Like these tend to be games that I think, depending on what player count they have, So if they're for 2, 4, 6 players, they kind of tend to dominate tables once you own them. So a classic example of this, which I'm not going to be recommending, but people might want to consider as a comparison point, is Twilight Imperium. Twilight Imperium is very big, very expensive, requires a lot of preparation and time. Generally, like you prep it ahead of people coming over to your place, and it takes like a full afternoon, depending on who's playing it. But that's the kind of game that I'm thinking about when I say, you know, like if you buy one of these, it is a kind of game that you can play over and over again, but it will eat up the player count that game functions at.
Yeah.
So
That game I love. I have in my circle of gaming acquaintances and friends uh a lot of players that I can pull from to play this game. And I have had this be the case for many years. I still only bust out this game once every 2 years, except for one miraculous occasion where I got 3 games of it in within like 6 months, and it was awesome. This game's amazing. Like,
yeah,
Twilight Imperium is such a cool game. It is a bit wacky. Don't play it if you're like, I want to min max and achieve a victory from min maxing the game. You can't really. It's more of a social experiment with with numbers in it. It's one of those alliance forging games, and you know, whatever your table meta is socially, it's going to kind of dictate the way things go. But if you want that experience, like once every 2 years or so,
yeah,
get it. It is worth it. You just also have to do the work of getting it to the table, which is, you know, that's not for everybody. When you buy a box of Twilight Imperium, you are buying a social responsibility to yourself to get that game played. It's not just what's in the box.
yeah. I'm gonna recommend a game that I don't even own because you own it, and I have not had the need to purchase it. But I know that we played a ton of when it came out, and we haven't really touched it this year. But I would be down to play it whenever. Tapestry.
Tapestry's
So
on your list?
yeah,
No way.
you would also
This is my real holiday present.
what
Okay.
that you would also recommend?
Can I hijack this?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Okay. So there's this board game called Tapestry. It's made by Stonemaier Games, same folks who made Wingspan and Scythe. And Tapestry kind of like it did not have a warm welcome compared to Stonemeier's other games. And it is my favorite of them. I think it's a legitimate masterpiece of a game. Like, it is not hard to teach. Your choices
Hard to
are
master.
hard to master. I agree with that. But it's not complex in the way you want it to be complex. It's a civilization building game for one. So it's a Civ style. You start with very little, and then you build. You get some territory. You get some science. You get these really beautifully made structures, and you build up your own little city board with these wonderful buildings. And like, I don't know what this game, what folks wanted this game to be. And I get if this isn't like the epic sprawling civilization builder that players of Civilization or the Total War series would want, if that's where you're coming to this from. But
Yeah.
as like a board game, this game is so good. Like, I think comparing it to maybe like something like Through the Ages, which is another civilization builder, very long form. God, I just think Tapestry does it so well in like an hour to an hour and a half. And
I
you could teach it to anyone. I really think so.
yeah. I think the main distinction is this game sits in a very unique spot in terms of game genre where it looks like something like Total War and Civilization, but it's actually very combat light. And I think a lot of the games that we tend to associate with like historical simulation or like pseudo historical simulation, like Scythe or Through the Ages or Civ, tend to be very combat heavy.
Yeah.
And so this game is really more about like if you want to play the idea of civilizational archetypes. So you're not playing real countries, you're playing, you know, a civilization that is based around science or a civilization that is based around religion or art, and how you build that out looks very different, you know, between games. And there's more than enough civilizations and unique cards that come up that I think you could play this game 50 times and never once double up on the same configuration of powers or cards in a way that feels meaningful, in a way
Yeah.
that I think like every game plays out very, very differently.
And in um your decision space, your core decision is really there are five if you have the latest expansion tracks that you move up on, and your decision is just which track do I move up on this turn, and this will do a larger thing. This will have larger implications for how my civilization grows, how I interact with other players, etc. But really, you're just looking at these 4 to 5 tracks and going, where do I want to progress now? Do I want science? Do I want warfare? Do I want exploration? Do I want innovation? I believe is the other one, the yellow track, and that's all you're doing, and all you have to do is pick one of those.
Yeah.
And so it's really easy to just get into and be like, I think I want to do this. But also there is a ton of depth, and I will say I've played Tapestry a lot, and I know there were some complaints about like the randomness in the cards affecting like your end game score. I find that critique to be overblown. I can very consistently win this game regardless of what I get. I don't know. And listen, I fully say that as someone who consistently loses Wingspan regardless of what I get. So it's not to brag. It's just to say like I don't think the random stuff, if that bothers you, is actually that severe. Like your choices do matter, but they aren't paralyzing the choices. Like you always just be like, even if you don't know, you can just be like, I go up on this track, whatever, right? Like you can still be playing, and no matter what you're doing, even if you're behind, you get to get these nice buildings. You get to see your city grow. You get to see what you develop into through your tapestry cards that advance your civilization. Like it feels like you're growing, even if you're behind. Like I just think the game is good. I really don't understand the hate for this, but the good news is that because the game did not do super well, there are still a bunch of copies of this game in clearance in local game stores because people didn't buy it up, which is such a shame. And I hope that we look back on Tapestry as though we were really foolish as a collective, because wow,
great sadness.
It's such a cool game. It's one of the games I want to play the most.
Yeah.
But it's not as cool as Eastern European war robots.
Is that your recommendation next?
Absolutely not. But I just mean in terms of like it's a harder sell than, you know, World War I era mechs.
I do want to slot in a very specific kind of recommendation at this like price scale, you know, like the low 100 range, or like close to 100 or maybe a little bit over depending on where you're buying from. And these I'm going to asterisk by saying you and I like playing these, and we haven't really talked about this kind of game up to now. So I would qualify these as long form but single session 2-player historical epic games. And I'm going to recommend 2 very different ones in tandem. And one is, you know, kind of if you're like a board game person listening to this, you're going to be like, of course, which is Twilight Struggle, which is sort of the Cold War history epic where one player plays, you know, the USA aligned block and the other player plays the USSR aligned block. And you tend to move through phases of the Cold War with cards and effects and avoid nuclear disaster. But also, you know, you're, like the cards you're playing are historical events like the Cuban Missile Crisis or like the abdication of the Romanian royal family or things like that. The other game that I would recommend in tandem with this, which is much less based on cards and much more based on territory control, is Polis. And I love Polis, but it is in that space of like you and the person who play this must love playing very historical, like not bombastic but expansive history games. And this is
Yeah.
a two-player version of the Peloponnesian War in ancient Greece, where one player plays the Delian League and one player plays the Peloponnesian League. And trading and conflict and events. It's a really, really gorgeous game that has, I want to say, very chunky components. Like the board is very big and sturdy, and the cards are really neat and look like old Attic pottery, and just like a very unique style of game. Both are very good for that very specific kind of taste. And I think outside of that are probably like unplayable. Like the other people would look at these games and be like, absolutely not. Like this is not what I want to be doing with 6 hours of my life.
Yeah. I think it's good. It's a very specific person who wants this game.
Yeah.
And that person is Andre Zanescu.
It's true. But there are people like that who might be listening to this.
No,
and
for sure.
For you, get this. And for not you, stay away.
The one that I would recommend, that is, I think, very, because Tapestry is actually yours. So I'm going to do my last larger larger price point game. It's around 120 Canadian with shipping. It's Dwellings of Eldervale. It's from 2020, but again was out of stock forever. Just got back in stock. It's a high fantasy worker placement game, and if you're hearing that and haven't heard of this game, you're going like, another one. This game is awesome. I think on the first play it's a bit heavy. Second time through, I don't think so. It has worker placement, territory control. It has combat, but it has all of these things in a way that is, I think, reasonably accessible for how big this game is. And if you want like the vibe of a Twilight Imperium, obviously not in space, but of like, it's really sprawling. There is some social elements if you get there are some social elements if you get enough players around this table, but it also has really, really interesting worker placement decisions coupled with all these other mechanics. This thing is awesome. It's easier than it looks to pick up. It's a very high quality game, and just like, if anyone was in the mood to play worker placement with me at a player count of 2, 3, 4, 5 even, I'd pick this game every time right now. That's how much I like this.
Yeah. Now, there's the last kind of game to talk about, and maybe we each only do one recommendation on this, and that's legacy games, right? So we talked about Arkham having a campaign system, but this is much more like the entire game is a campaign style board take on a base board game that you play with a set number of people over multiple sessions. So this is really for people who want to invest a bit more, but have a core group that they want to meet with, somewhere between, I'm going to say, like 4 and 10 afternoons. And really just like, this is your social gathering game. There are a bunch of these. There are many, many good ones. And so like us recommending only one doesn't mean that that's the only one we want to recommend. It's just that like that's probably, the best one for us anyways.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of yours?
I know what mine is. I know what yours isn't.
Oh, interesting.
I think. Unless you Shyamalan me here, but
well, okay, so I'll just say what my recommendation is, and this is also kind of probably the most expensive board game that somebody can buy, or one of the most expensive ones, but I think is just like an absolutely massive quantity of game to play. It's Gloomhaven.
It's so weird. I don't even think of this as a legacy game.
I think it is like,
but it is. It's just huge.
Price probably varies somewhere between 100 and 200 USD.
Oh no, this game's more than that now.
But I will say, I think we played what, like 20 sessions of this. We played at two. You played solo. We played at 2-person. We played at 3. We played at 4. The one real big asterisk with this is it's setup heavy, and so it favors longer sessions or it existing on a table that you don't really touch for a while.
Yeah.
And I would also recommend that people get the app on an iPad or a phone to help management with the game. Outside of that, it's fantastic.
This is really like closer to a table, like a TTRPG than a board
Yeah.
game, I think. But not really, because the way the combat works, it's very board gamey
Yeah.
in a
It's
good
like
way. Like the game is great. I love
D&D
this game.
If you had like a D&D that was a bit lighter on the RP components and more about the board game components, but also the combat was a bit more streamlined and you had much more for dungeon delving. It's just like its own thing. I would recommend, if people are interested based on what we're saying here, to just go look at, a review of it online on YouTube, preferably, so you can get like a sense of how the pieces work. But be careful to not get spoiled, because a lot of the characters you unlock are supposed to be secret, and so there's like,
Yeah, it's a big part of the charm.
16 classes, and you only start with like 4 or 5. There's just nothing else like it, really, and I think it has sort of become the standard by which other, of these maxi scale legacy games are gauged as a success or not. This game is
maximal production. And then Frosthaven is also being delivered right now, and you can get a secondhand copy in the United States and in Europe.
So excited.
Some European countries. The Canadian ones are delayed, but Frosthaven's just a bigger version of this. But if you haven't played Gloomhaven yet, you can get in on that. If the board game and all that extra setup is not your style, there is a digital version of this now that is co-op, and it is good. It is a also lower budget video game, so there is some jank in it, but the game is good regardless. If you like that tactical combat style, you have a very long series of unlockables. I think it takes in around 70 hours to beat it, I think, is what Scott and I put into
scenarios?
It. And it's a lot. It's a lot of game. And there's a couple different modes too, although I think the main campaign mode is actually the best one still. It's clearly the way that game was designed. Although there is one boss in there that in the rule book, it tells you things about how the boss behaves that make it sensible and easy to solve the puzzle that is that boss. But in the game, it gives you no indication of how it works. And so I actually had to go back to my board game copy, read that scenario in the thing, and be like, oh, this is how we do it. Which, some oversight. But both versions of Gloomhaven are awesome.
That's my big legacy recommendation. How about you?
I think it's not Machikoro Legacy, that's for sure. Because with my play group that included Andre, Machikoro is just this little quaint dice rolly Yahtzee town builder that you play in like 20-25 minutes per game. You get these little cute gems and figures, and you're not supposed to take it too seriously. But with every game like this, oh man, it went off the rails. And so I can't actually recommend Machikoro Legacy to anybody. It resulted in not violence, but emotional violence, I would say.
It had, I wouldn't say it had Monopoly mechanics, but it definitely led to Monopoly attitudes.
Yes, that's what I would say. So avoid Machikoro Legacy as much as I would like to be able to recommend it now. My favorite Legacy game is Clank Legacy. I think Clank is such a cool game. It's a deck builder, dungeon delver. It's not too hard. It's kind of just always fun playing cards in Clank and going into the lower levels of the dungeon and getting loot and bringing it out and doing this. You're kind of like going on a card played based race over a series of 10-ish games of this. And that's just good. It's good. Clank Legacy. It's a great game.
Yeah. So I guess that caps off our sort of card game slash board game
I think it actually
component.
caps off the whole podcast because we've been talking about it for an hour. So we're gonna have to do some quick recommendations for video games.
Yeah, I'm cool with that. So maybe I would only do one or two very short form, without like much discussion about them.
Sure.
I think if you want to buy a video game for somebody, I would recommend, I would want to give a recommendation for, you're not really sure if that person enjoys difficult games, and you are sure that that person enjoys difficult games. And I think the latter case, we would probably share the same recommendation for this year,
Yeah.
which is just Elden Ring.
Yeah. If they haven't played Elden Ring and they like hard games,
Pretty much it. I have, more complicated thoughts on it that we're going to get into when we do the Have You Played podcast in a couple weeks. But still, big, the big recommendation, still one game of the year. Absolutely massive game, like 100 plus hours of game, and just enormous. If folks are into that kind of game, for sure.
yeah. So I don't actually have like a specific game recommendation. I think like this year has been so strange for games, I think, for me.
Yeah.
There's always, as with every year, there's a lot to choose from. And for me, like, in doing this kind of gift guide, my feeling is like, even with the board games that we recommended, like the experience that someone wants from a game can be so specific at the time. And so like, surprise be damned. Just just ask the person what they're looking for before you buy them a game.
That's fair.
I think is what my gift giving idea is this: communication. It's important, and if you really want the surprise, I don't know, take a risk.
Yeah.
Go wild. You never know what's going to be good or bad.
And don't feel bad if you do want to keep the surprise, and the stuff that we've talked about is not to your liking. I would very much recommend, for example, like Polygon's top 100 games of the year list has a pretty resounding roster of genres, platforms, and price ranges to choose from, and likely you'll find something interesting or magical on that list for sure.
Yeah, agreed. Hey, we were going to talk about World of Warcraft, but now we're really out of time. And so what I think we're going to do is, because we promised it at the start of this podcast, we should just sum up how we're feeling in about 2 minutes max each.
Okay.
I will start. So I'm really enjoying the expansion, and I'm still going to keep playing it. I'm doing my first raid tonight with a group of inclusive, friendly folks, is how their guild was advertised to me. So I hope that turns out to be a legitimate thing. They seem friendly. I did one dungeon with them earlier, but unfortunately I had to work a ton of the week. So I'm really interested to see how that goes. I started doing Mythic Plus, which is the more competitive dungeon side of things, and it's not server based either. So I'm on a pretty friendly server by design. When you do that stuff, you go cross server, so you're just playing with anybody, and it's more competitive. And even at like the lowest level of competition here, like when it's really not even competitive yet, it just gets slightly challenging. Man, it gets toxic right away. It's so much of the content that I really enjoy doing, but I've done 2 of these. I think I've done 2 or 3 of these so far. All of them have had instances where people are like going pretty hard on someone else in there for effectively nothing. Like really no gameplay infractions were really done. It's people just playing the way that they want to play, and it immediately becomes an issue. And that's exciting stuff that I get to write about in my thesis, but also like, here's my gift giving guide. The gift you can give to another gamer in your life, if you are an MMO player, is just some chill. Just be chill. All right. That's like last night. I'm just there blasting away, doing my job, and I'm like, things could be cleaner in this dungeon. But I don't need to yell at anyone for not. It's going fine. It will be fine. We will get through this. Just calm down. Uh, but no, man. People are losing their shit, and I don't know what it is about like this mid tier. Like the cutting edge area right now at the start of the season would be if you're doing something like a plus 10, 11, 12 mythic plus right now, maybe even higher than that. And I was just chilling in plus fours because there's some dungeons I haven't done in a long time, and I'm trying to just get my feet wet. I am a solid player. Like I am doing great DPS. I do not die in these so far, but I really just wanted to learn them, get back into it. And I don't know, but there's a lot of other people at this level that think they are like cutting edge top tier players, and I don't know if it's because of that belief, but they will immediately take that out on whatever they perceive to be something going wrong in these runs, and oftentimes these players are simply not that good. And it really is just like, why instead of yelling at another player, why don't you just, like, I don't know, think about what you're doing and maybe you could do better and just adapt to what the other players are doing in this, and be nice about it, especially when it's a foregone conclusion that we're going to succeed at this thing, because at this level it's very easy. Like, they're not hard yet. They're not. I don't know. That's my experience. I hope I managed to really enjoy the group of players I've found, so I don't have to do any more of this kind of pickup gameplay. Although, it's gonna be interesting to see if in this guild it is toxic or not as well once it starts getting competitive. Curious. How are you feeling?
So, we haven't talked about this since the game launched, but I had a very, very rocky start with the expansion. I had a lot of trouble. Well, I wasn't even sure I was going to play originally, and this is unique to WoW. It's like the only game I don't hype, extrapolate, and immediately like get in on. And a large part of that was because the class that I most enjoy thematically was by far like the worst in the game, Marksman Hunter. And so I spent, I want to say, the first week or so, when I had time to play, which wasn't that much, trying out classes that I had enjoyed before. So Havoc and Vengeance Demon Hunter, which is really kind of at the top of the pile, as a class that does everything. And then Prot Warrior. And I settled on Prot Warrior, which was the better tank, because I enjoyed the way that it plays a bit more than how Demon Hunters have changed. Spoiler, they've gotten a bit more complicated, and I didn't care for the way that the new rotations work. And I started tanking, and I did the first 2 zones, and the story content was fantastic, and I felt like I could do 3-man and 5-man quests without really batting an eyelash, and I started doing some dungeons. And as soon as I got even into the learning dungeons, people just started yelling at me. And especially the second dungeon, for people who are going to the expansion, has some like new flying mechanics that aren't that complicated once you know how they work. But the first time you go into the dungeon, it's a learning process, as any new navigation mode is. And I really just didn't, like, I hadn't played games where I am in a position to be yelled at in about a year. And I just really didn't care for it. And I put the game down for a couple days, wondering if I would pick it back up, and trying to find a class that I liked playing if it wasn't this. And it became really difficult. So I realized that I'm a player who really doesn't enjoy that many of the classes in WoW. I enjoy the ones that I do a lot, but there are a few of them. And many of the ones that I enjoy put me in a position to be yelled at by other players. And eventually I just ended up settling on playing Marksman Hunter, which is by far the worst DPS class in the game. And just live with the fact that I don't deal any damage. And I'm having fun playing the quests. I'm about where I was when I quit on the new character. And nobody says anything to me in dungeons. They yell at the tank, who is not me. And I get to ignore that. And just generally, I found being behind the curve where you're at, like the second grouping of players, it's got that immediate, like, know how to do everything vibe already, and I'm I'm finding it not that pleasant. Quite
Uh,
frankly, I'm in for the story,
yeah.
but there is a high chance that once my subscription lapses in January, that I don't keep playing.
Yeah.
Um, because the game is, it's got the magic of the dragon writing and all that stuff is really fantastic. But once I get to the point where you're at, I am going to have to deal with people who are going to be like, why are you playing the worst numbers class in the game? And my answer will be because I like it. And their answer will be to kick me from the group,
Yeah.
which it's kind of the way that this goes. And, I'm playing other games right now where I really don't have that vibe. And, maybe balance your classes better so that players who want to play a specific flavor of character aren't like 30% behind the good classes in the game, and are in a position to be
Or
harassed by other players. Also,
maybe
don't be a
yeah,
mean
I mean,
player.
really, let's actually work together to maybe like make it so that the default experience for like tanks, because it tanking has always been, I think, a bit of a high pressure scenario in this game. But like back in the day, you wouldn't like backseat drive your tanks constantly. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know why this is. I mean, that's I do kind of know why this is the culture now. But like, how about we get together and shame these people because
Yeah.
just follow your damn tank, you know? Like, this is one of the things that happened in the group last night is the tank, rightfully so, at the start of the expansion, wanted to do a +4 mythic plus, which is low on the low side of difficulty, and kind of limit test where they're at with their gear and do small pulls. And immediately one of the DPS is like, just pull everything. And he does. And we wipe. And it's just like, why don't you just trust? Like, just
Yeah.
let the tank feel out what they need to do in this situation. Like, it is such a, oh,
The dungeon I ran last night is the Naku defensive dungeon, and our tank had to step away from the keyboard for a minute. We learned afterwards because they have a child that they were taking care of.
yeah.
And one of the people just kept spamming question mark in the chat and then just went to pull the pack to force the tank into tanking. And they weren't there. So we just died. And then they yelled at the tank for not being there. And when the tank replied that they have a child, their answer was, imagine having a child. Which,
Well, I think in that
yikes.
group you did have one. Like,
Yeah, and I will say, because I tanked a lot in Shadowlands until I stopped playing because I was done with the content that was available at the time, and I tanked all the way up to +12s in that first season of Shadowlands, and proportionately, I got yelled at in +12s a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, whenever Shadowlands launched, because my scale of time is completely messed up. The way that I got yelled at in on level learning dungeons, like not even Mythic 0 dungeons, just
yeah.
the first time you go into them, people were acting the same way. And I do suspect that, like, mediatization of extremely proficient teams running MDI and sort of the esports culture merger with dungeons has increased the level of intensity that people
Yeah,
exhibit.
I think maybe the closing point of this episode to close off the year for CTG Weekly, because we are going on hiatus until the new year after this next Have You Played episode, is this: just because you watch high level play doesn't mean you are a high level player.
Or that other people with you are, and
Yeah.
that they want to play the game that way.
Like, coming from a guy who has done world first racing in WoW, you're not, if you're doing that, this isn't the kind of stuff you're doing. You're just being toxic and shitty. Like, if you want to get that good, go find those people and be that good with them. Like,
Yeah.
That's not what this is. That's not what you're doing. You are not
My-
a superstar. If you
my
are,
equivalent-
you would be a superstar. You wouldn't be pugging dungeons with me, a dude who specifically plays casually now. Like, there
my
is a
metaphor
space
for
for
this-
this.
My metaphor for this is you watch the Fast and the Furious movies and you really identify with that, and then you go buy a souped up Nissan, but you yell at people on the street
Yeah,
for
that's
not
what this
being
is.
street racers.
You're out of your mind. Like, truly, you are deluding yourself a little bit about who you are and who the people around you are.
Hey, that was a bit more than 2 minutes.
You're just chilling to have a game, and post COVID world. Happy holidays. Bring some chill, please.
Enjoy games with the ones you love, and spirit of positivism.
Positivism.
Positivity.
of positivism.
I'm tired.
Of verifying facts to data.
Oh. Listen, it's been a long year, man.
On that note, for Mark and Andre, this has been this year in CTG Weekly, and we'll see you next year. Have a lovely holiday. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.